So to get started with BlockBlender version 1.41, you're going to need to download and install Blender. So if you haven't done that already, you can go to blender.org, go to this download page right here, and what you want to get is either 3.5 or 3.6. So 3.6.2 will work also. That's the one that I'm using in this video. So once you download and install Blender, then you can actually download BlockBlender either on Gumroad or on Blender Market. This is Gumroad right here. And as you can see, there is a free version. You have to click to select which one you want. If you haven't used Blender before, I definitely recommend getting the free version first to try it out, because I don't want you to get the full version and then feel like I ripped you off. But anyway, if you get the free version, you can just type 0 in right here and then click this button. Or if you want, you can still pay for it even though it's free. Full version is $20 US dollars, but depending on the region you're in, this might change price. That's just a thing that Gumroad does. It tries to make this like equivalent to how much it's worth in your country. So I've seen it as low as like $6, so definitely check that out. But anyway, once you press this button, it will send you to a download page right here. So as you can see, this is the add-on. It says add-on right here, and it's a zip file. This file right here is a blend file. That means you can open it with Blender, and it's basically just a bunch of examples and stuff like that. So you can download that too if you'd like, but definitely download the zip because that's what we're going to be using in this video. So then once you get into Blender, you need to install it. That's pretty easy. You just go up to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and then Install right here. And yours is probably going to be in the Downloads folder. Mine is somewhere else, so I'll just find it really quickly. So right here we have two different zip files, and you want to make sure that you don't open them up. Just leave them like this. That's how the add-on works. But we have the free version and the full version, so you can select whichever one you downloaded and then click install. And then you just want to make sure that it's enabled so that it has a check like that. And then you can also save preferences down here so that every time you open Blender, it will be installed and enabled. And then once you do that, when you're hovering over the viewport right here, you can press N to open up the side panel, and you'll see that there's like a BlockBlender tab right here, and you'll have all these options. If for some reason you don't want to use the add-on, there are other ways to use it. You can also append it to your file, or you can use the asset library. And if you want to learn about that, you can watch this video. I'll put it in the description. You can just check that out. I explain it there. I'm pretty sure it's like right in the beginning of the video. I recommend using the add-on though. Before we actually get started, I just want to talk about these buttons down here. We have frequently asked questions and my Discord server. So this is going to be helpful for if you're a beginner and you're just getting started. You can click this button and it will send you to this page right here where it's just a whole list of questions that people have asked me that I tried to answer here. So check this first if you have any questions, and then if you don't find your answer, you can click the Discord button and ask me there. But this will have a lot of stuff, and I will be covering like some of these questions in this video. So the very basics of it is you select an object. You want to make sure that it's a mesh object, and you'll know it's a mesh if when you select it over up here in the outliner, you can see that there's this like triangle icon. That means it's a mesh and it's the correct type of object. If it's like an empty or a camera or a light or something like that, like as you can see in this castle right here, this is a different icon. That means that it's an empty, and that's not going to be able to convert because it's just kind of like a reference object. It has no real geometry or anything like that. But anyway, what you want to do is select your object, and then you can click this button, turn selected into blocks, and it will turn into blocks. That's the very basics of it. Let's just select the mesh right here, and then you can press this button. It's like a little wrench to go to the modifier panel. This is where a lot of the options are for BlockBlender. If we scroll to the very bottom, you can see that there are a ton of categories right here. And this is the main difference between the free and the paid version, is that this is the paid version right here. It has all these different selections that you can choose for blocks. The free version doesn't have that. It just lets you choose a single block right here, which if you check this right here, it just lets you turn everything into one block like that. So the free version has that, but it doesn't have all of these other options because it only has like 32 blocks, which should be enough to test things out and get colors that are close enough so that you can actually tell that they're the same as your object. But that's the main difference. Everything else is going to be pretty much the same. So as you can see right now, this is just glass because we haven't selected an image for it to use as a color. So our beach ball, you can see we can hide it right here, or we can press this hide button and it's going to basically do the same thing. We also have a remove button if you just want to remove it completely. Let's just turn it back though. So we need to select an image to make sure that it's the right color. And to make sure that you're using the right image, you can go to this right here, material. You can see this is our beach ball material. Go to surface. You want to look at the base color. Press this arrow. You can see we have two things plugged into it right here. Let's check the first one. And this one is an image. You can tell because this little icon right here looks like a picture frame. That means that it's an image. And this is just called scene root base color. So that's the one that we're gonna try, scene root base color. And that's the one that's going to turn it the correct color. So this is very low resolution right now. So basically what we have to do is just scale it up. There are a few ways that we can do this. We can tab into edit mode, just press tab, or you can change that up here to go into edit mode. Press A to select everything, and then S to scale it up like this. And when it's the scale that you want, you can just left click like that. And now it's bigger. A thing to notice is that all of the blocks are the same size as they were before, and the object is getting bigger. So a different way to do that, let's just press Control Z to back out of here, is you can come over here and you can change the block size instead. So 1 meter blocks is how big the blocks are in Minecraft. So that's why it's set to 1 meter right here. But if you want, you can make this smaller, and basically it's just going to make the blocks smaller, but the object is going to stay the same size. So that's another way to kind of increase the resolution. We also have model scale right here. So you can just turn this up like that. So if you use model scale and then you go into edit mode and look at the wireframe, you'll see that this is still very small. So this is kind of, it's not actually scaling it. It's a non-destructive way of doing it, which is good if you just want to scale things up pretty fast. It's good for beginners who they just see scale right here. They turn it up and it actually makes the thing bigger. But if you want to be able to like edit it and have it be the same scale, then I recommend just scaling it up in edit mode like I showed you first. The other way of scaling is actually in object mode. So if you select your object and press S to scale, you can see it's getting bigger, but the blocks are also getting bigger, which is not what we want. A thing to notice is this little panel right here shows the scale and the dimensions. So typically you want your scale to always be 1. So when we scale this up, you can see the scale is getting bigger like that. The dimensions are also getting bigger. So if we turn this up to around 10 like that, and then we apply the scale, what's going to happen is the scale will turn back to 1, but the dimensions should stay the same. So we can apply the scale, and now our model has changed so that the blocks are now 1 meter blocks, and it's about 10 blocks across. That's what the dimensions are showing us, basically how many blocks are in each direction. But that is another way of doing it. You can just scale it up in object mode and then apply the scale like that. It also works when you scale it. It also works when you rotate it, which is a problem that some people have. They might notice that their blocks are rotated at a weird angle or whatever. All you have to do is press this button to apply the rotation, and then it will work. So let's talk about converting errors now, because a lot of people have been complaining about getting error messages, which is something I need to fix in the future, but I haven't had enough time to do it lately. I've been kind of busy with other stuff. So let's just talk about where they happen and why they happen and how to avoid it. So like I said before, you want to make sure that you're converting meshes, and they're going to have this triangle icon. So check out a different one, this castle right here. You can see has a lot of empties. That's what these little like Y-shaped icons are. And if we select one of those and try to convert it, we're going to get that error because you can't convert an empty into blocks. You can't convert it into a mesh. It just doesn't work that way because they're just these like little reference objects that have no geometry. It's also not going to work if you have an armature selected. It's not going to work. If you have an empty or a light or a camera, it's also going to give you an error. So just make sure that you always have a mesh selected. Let's talk about this join selected objects. This is going to be helpful for models like this that are made up of a bunch of different objects right here. So basically what we want to do is you want to just select a piece of the mesh, then you can press A to select everything else, or you can just like select it and then click and drag to box select like that. When you have everything selected, then you can press join selected objects. But before you do that, make sure that the active selection, the one that's yellow right here, is actually a mesh that's selected, because like I said before, if you have an empty as your active selection when you try to do this, it's going to give you an error also. So now we can press this and it will join all of them into a single object like that. Another thing to pay attention to is if this is parented to anything. And as we can see over here, well, a quick way to find your object that's selected over here, let's just select it, hover over here and press period on the number pad, and it will find it for you. So it's actually parented to this empty right here, which might make the scale or rotation a little weird. And I'll show you what I mean. When we select this, you can see that the dimensions are like less than the size of a block. So when we turn this into blocks, it should be invisible, but it won't be, because the size of the empty is different, and that's what it's parented to. So let's press Control Z, select everything, and just apply the scale of everything. And now it should work properly. Another thing we can also do is just delete all of the empties. So we can do that by selecting this object, then pressing Control I. That's just going to invert the selection, so it's selecting everything else now, and then X to delete those. Now we can turn this into blocks. So this is another problem that people run into, where they turn something into blocks and it just disappears. And like I said before, that's because the dimensions right here are less than the size of a block. So let's turn it into blocks again, tab into edit mode. With everything selected, we can just scale it up, and you can see when it gets big enough, then you'll actually be able to see blocks like that. Or, as I said before, you can also just make the block size smaller. I recommend leaving the block size set to 1 meter, just because it's the same as Minecraft. You'll actually get like an accurate scale. But let's scale this up anyway. And before we apply the textures to this, I just want to talk about this last button, Convert to Mesh. So this is good for if you have an object that has a bunch of other modifiers, like we have all these modifiers. Whenever you convert something to a mesh, it's going to apply all the modifiers and make it so that when you go into edit mode, you can actually edit everything that you're seeing. It's also good for if you have curves and you want to turn them into a mesh. So let's hide this really quickly, and I'll just bring in a curve, scale it up, and we can give it some thickness over here like that. And so you can see the icon is different. This means that it's a curve object and not a mesh. This actually will turn into blocks just fine. But if you have this and you have like a mesh object and you want to turn both of them into, like, if you want to join them together, you're not going to be able to join them together because they're two different object types. And you're probably going to get an error, or like nothing's going to happen. As you can see right here, nothing is just happening. So let's just convert this to a mesh. You can see that the icon changed. And now if we want, we can join these into one object. So this is just useful for, like I said, converting things into a mesh and applying modifiers. And now this will turn into one object like that. Just going to delete that, go back to our castle. And let's talk about if you have multiple images and you want to apply the color to it. So let's just select this and go over to the materials. And you can see that it has a bunch of different materials. So that means that we're going to have to give it a few different images. And luckily, I know this one is already made of images. We'll talk about if you don't have an image texture to use. We'll talk about that a little later. But to make sure that you're putting these, one thing about using multiple images like this is you have to make sure that you put them in the right order, or else it's not going to work right. So to make sure that you're doing it in the right order, you just want to put them in the same order as they're appearing over here. And if you want to be able to like reference it quickly without jumping back and forth between these two tabs a lot, you can right click where two windows meet and then horizontal split like that. We can just make a new window. So one of these is going to show us the materials. The other one's going to show us our modifier panel right here. So let's do what we did before and just look at the base color. You can see the first thing is just an image called material base color. So let's set that material base color. So part of it is right now, but we need to fill in the other ones. So let's check the second one, and we can see that this is 0.002 base color. And luckily I know with this one that all of the images are the same names as the materials. So I'm just going to go through really quickly and just put them in this order. So 002 base color, 001, 003, and then 004. And now it should look correct. We can scale it up a little to see it in a slightly higher resolution like that. And just to show you what I mean, that like it doesn't work if you do it in the wrong order, let's just like put these backwards or something like that. Okay, so these are all the correct images for this object, but I put them backwards, and as you can see, it just doesn't look right. So you have to make sure that you're putting them in the correct order as we see over here. And if you'd rather not deal with this whole thing, or if you have like a ton of images, there is another way to do it, and I will talk about baking textures. That's what you would need to do. I'll talk about baking textures a little later. So let's join this back up. We can just right click where the windows meet, join areas, and I'll drag it down like that. Okay. A thing I forgot to mention is that you can choose different block selections. So if you're on a server that's still using 1.17 and you don't want to include newer blocks, you can select this. There is a little problem that might arise if you're switching this a lot. So let's just set this to 1.19 and try to turn this into blocks. I'll show you what I mean and how to fix it. So let's bring back the beach ball right here, and let's turn this into blocks. And as you can see, it will turn white. So this is a thing that might happen, and it's pretty easy to fix. Basically, you can just remove the modifier from this object like that. Then come over here and find all of the blocks that you had imported. You can just select both of those, right click and delete hierarchy like that. And now when you try to convert things, it should work fine like that. So if you're ever getting that problem, just delete all of the blocks and then turn it into blocks again. Okay, so let's talk about if you just want to use custom colors. So for that, there's a palette that I have included. You can either use it to color something completely from scratch, or if you want, you can actually mix the color with the existing color. So let's mix with the existing color right here first. Basically, what we need to do is just select the object, go over here to the material, and then we can create a new material right there. And then what I'm going to choose is called full palette material. That's just going to make it so that we can see a little better. Then I'm just going to hide the modifier really quickly, and we can tab into edit mode. And I'm just going to select part of the mesh that I want to change. Say, for instance, the blue doesn't look right to you. So you can just select all the parts that are blue and then assign right here. Make sure that you have the second material selected and press assign. And you can see that it has already changed. Now let's turn this back on, and we can actually select the second image. So that's going to be full palette right here. And now we can choose the color. So to choose the color, you can go over to UV editing right here. The one that I want to look at is either going to be called full palette right here, or you can choose full palette block reference. So full palette is just going to look, it's just going to show you the texture that it's actually using. The one that I like to use is the block reference right here. There's also an isometric one where you can see like all of the corners, like all of the sides. So I'm just going to select this right here, and I want to make it a blue block. So wherever you drag this is going to change those colors. If you want it to be a solid color, you can just press S to scale it down and scale it to 0. So it's going to be like a single point now. And we can just drag this over whatever block color we want. So you can just drag this to select whatever block you want, basically. So if we wanted, we could make this like emerald or whatever, amethyst. Just to show you how it works if you're doing it from scratch, let's just bring in a torus right here and turn it into blocks. Just going to tab into edit mode and scale it up so it's quite a bit bigger. And now we can again select full palette right here, and we can go over to the UV editor. So if you don't have it already unwrapped, like this one's going to already be unwrapped, but if you don't have it unwrapped, you have a few options. In edit mode, make sure that you're in edit mode right here. You can press U, and then I would recommend either Smart UV Project, and the default settings should probably be fine. Or you can do projected from view. So projected from view is basically just going to make the UV islands over here the same shape as however, like whatever direction you're looking. So let's look from the top and project it again. You can see it's a little different now, but wherever you move this is going to change the colors over here. So let's just select this, and instead of scaling it all the way down, let's just scale it on the X direction right here, and we can make it a gradient. Let's just make it a black and white gradient by dragging it over here, and I'll scale that, press S and Y to scale it in the Y direction. And you can see now that it is dark on this side and light on that side right there. So that's how you do that. And if, for instance, you want part of it to be a different color, you can just select that part and move that somewhere else like this. And these can be gradients too, colorful gradients. You can just pull them across the colors like that. There you go. So that's how you do that. Let's talk about color attributes. You can see down here, we have an option to use color attributes, but when we check it, it's just going to turn into glass at the beginning. So by default, the color attributes are going to be called color like this. So, but if you decide that you're going to change the name of it, then you want to make sure that the name is correct here. You can tell the name of your UV map and the color by pressing this button right here. It's the object data properties. It's like it says data. So we have UV maps right here. And so you can see that's the name that we have for our UV map. That's the one that we should be using here. Color attributes, we don't have one yet, but we can add one, and it's going to be called color by default. So that's the one that we want to use here also. So let's turn this on, and a few ways that you can do it. You can either go into sculpt mode or vertex paint mode. Sculpt mode is the new way of doing it. And you can just scroll down until you see paint right here. And then it should use these colors at the top, or the first color anyway. So you can paint it white, blue. You have the radius right here, which is going to change the size of the brush, or you can press F. And we have the strength right here. So let's just turn the strength all the way up to make it like a solid, just full strength color like that. This is going to be like a good way of making gradients also, if you don't use the gradient tool, which I'll show later. So this is a fun thing to do. You can also go to vertex paint, and this is basically going to work the same way if it doesn't crash right now. And this is basically going to work the same way. We have a few different tools over here to use if you want to blur it or whatever. But yeah, this just works the same way. So let's go back now, how to do color attributes. Let's just go through all of the different modifier options right here. So I already talked about the color attribute, block size. Let's get rid of this, and I'll explain it with some other ones. So we have keep centered, and basically what that's going to do is it's going to lift it up to this line right here, and it's going to center it in every direction. This doesn't work like in object mode, or you're still able to move it around in object mode, but if you move it in edit mode, it will always snap back to that point right there. So this is just a quick way of, like, if you're modeling a house and you want to make sure that it's all centered and it's top of the ground, then that's a quick way of doing that. Next, we have interior and exterior thickness. So for that, let's look at the beach ball, and I'll talk about another issue that these can solve. So for interior thickness, that's going to be like how many blocks thick this is. If we go into object mode and look, or whatever, go into wireframe mode, it's kind of hard to tell, but this is hollow right now. And if we turn this up, you can kind of see it's changing. It's just getting thicker on the inside. You can also tell in material preview by just flying inside of it that it's hollow. So exterior thickness is just going to put the thickness on the outside instead. And one good thing about exterior thickness is it solves another issue that people run into a lot, where if we delete part of our mesh so that it has a hole in it right here, you can see now that it's like, if we delete part of our mesh so that it has a hole in it, you can see that it kind of breaks. The reason for this is that it basically has no thickness anymore. It can't tell what's inside and what's outside. So it doesn't really know where to put the blocks. But if you use exterior thickness, it should solve that. It's going to inflate it a little by like 1 block, but otherwise you would have to make sure that all of the holes are completely closed up, which can be kind of hard to do manually. So that's a way to get around it. Another reason for why when you convert it into blocks, it might just disappear is that it has a hole in it. So just use exterior thickness for that. So let's back up, close that hole, and let's talk about fill interior, which, as you might have guessed, is just going to completely fill it so it's not hollow anymore. Delete alpha is useful for if you're trying to turn images into blocks. So I do already have a few images right here. Let's do it with this face right here. We can turn it into blocks. Once again, it's a plane, so it has no thickness. That means we just have to give it exterior thickness and it will turn into blocks. Let's tab into edit mode and just scale this up. And we need to make sure that it's using the right image. So this one's called Real Steve, and now it's working properly. But this was a transparent image, so the background is made of glass. But if we check delete alpha, then all of the glass will disappear. It will still include other types of glass. It's basically looking for when something is completely transparent. And you can see some of the blocks are sideways. So again, apply the rotation. That's going to solve that. Another thing to talk about with images is the auto resolution and subdivide. So by default, auto resolution will be turned on, which for most things should make it so that the colors are accurate. If you turn it off, it's basically just going to look at the faces and give each face a color that's like closest to the image. So this only has one face right now, and that's why it's not appearing. It's probably seeing it as transparent or something. But when you turn auto resolution up, or when you turn it on, then it should be a little more accurate. If it's not accurate, like if this is really low, then you can just turn it a little higher, but be warned that this will get kind of slow when you turn it high. It will get more precise, but it'll be slower. Or you can use subdivide mesh, which when we turn this up, usually the maximum I'll turn it up to is like 7. And this can be pretty good for images or if that your object is made out of quads. But basically what it's doing is similar to when you're in edit mode and you right click and subdivide it right here. It's like doing that. So this would be subdivision 1. This would be 2. It's going to like quadruple the faces like every time, basically. So that's another thing that can help you get more accurate colors, but it will also get really slow, especially if you set this high. So turn it up one at a time and it'll probably work fine for you. A show height is just gonna show how many blocks tall it is, and that will change in real time as you scale it up like that. This should be the same as the Z value over here. So this third one right here is always going to be the same like that. It should be anyway. Next, we have join all parts. This is another thing. Like if you hover over it, it's going to tell you what it does, and it's going to tell you that it's slow also. So this is another thing that can make the colors more accurate. And I have an example made right here. Okay, so let's turn this into blocks. And we also want to use, I think I'm using a 1024 palette. It's a different palette that I have for the color. Let's just select everything and scale it up. So you can see this is not really looking the same way right here. And the reason for that is if we tab into edit mode and select this, this is actually just an entire sphere. And if we hide that and hide this one also, you can see that there's also another hidden sphere inside that's a different color. So that's why it's like white also. Sometimes a thing that can happen is it's trying to check like what color to make the blocks, and so it's looking for the closest mesh and what color it is. And so the white sphere that's inside, it can't really tell which one's closer, like if the white or the red is closer. So sometimes it's using one, sometimes it's using the other. Join all parts is basically going to remove all of the geometry that's inside. So we can check that. And now you can see there's like less gradation, and it's basically just ignoring the white sphere inside. So this is pretty helpful for specific types of models. It will make things a lot slower, but sometimes it's necessary for accuracy. Make instances real at this point. Well, originally it was for helping with exporting, and it was trying to make things faster. So if you uncheck this, it will probably get quite a bit slower. So I recommend leaving this checked And also, if you want to turn this into a mesh, like we can convert it into a mesh right here, you have to make sure that this is also checked. If we uncheck this and convert it into a mesh, it's not going to work. It's just going to disappear. So yeah, this is not really very useful at this point, and I might get rid of it in the future. Show layers is useful for if you want to try to build something by hand. So if you wanted to build the castle, you could turn on show layers, and it's basically just going to show you each layer. So this is the first layer. This would be the first 2 layers, so the second one, and you would be able to build it like stack by stack if you choose to do that instead of exporting it. So let's set this back to 1, turn it off. So I have this model of Steve. By the way, all of these models are just like free models that I got from Sketchfab, and I'll try to link them down below. Let's turn this into blocks, and this one's probably going to be called Steve. It's not. Let's see what it's called. Default base color. Okay, so let's look at the noise now. Basically, this is just going to randomize the colors so we don't get as much like solid patches like this. So we can turn the strength up, and the higher we turn it, the more it's going to change. 0.5 is usually the maximum I'll go, but it really depends. So you can change that if you want. W is just going to change the pattern, but it's not going to change the scale. So if we change the scale, if we want, we can make it a lot smaller, like 0.1. And you can see now the shapes are quite a bit bigger and more noticeable. And this is what I mean when I say the W will change the pattern, but it won't change the scale. Like it's never going to make, like, if it's not already really big splotches like that, it's not going to make it bigger or smaller splotches by changing the W. Detail is going to make these less soft and less round, like that. Roughness is similar. If you've used the noise node in like geometry nodes or shader nodes, then you'll understand what all of this does. Distortion is another similar thing. It's just going to push it around a little more. Change color, basically what it's going to do. Right now, this is mostly just making it lighter or darker colors, but if we choose change color, we will actually get some random color in there, which can be nice for things, especially if you're coloring things manually, like from scratch. It can be helpful to just make things solid colors and then change it with noise over here. So we turn this up, you can see we're getting a little color variation like right there, stuff like that. Then we have block selection, which is just going to let us decide which blocks we want to use. So let's turn this back to 0. And yeah, we have a bunch of different types of blocks. You can hover over them to get descriptions. What I like to do usually is just use like the first 3 or 4. And if you want to see what is in all of these, you can just look over here in this collection. You just have to turn it on. And you can see like what all of the blocks are in here. If you want, you can move them around. It's not going to save the next time you open it, but you can move them around. So that brings us to the next one, which is like changing block categories. I already have ones at the bottom that are just called unstable and unused. So we can take a look at those. So in unstable, that's things like ice that might melt, shulker boxes that are going to like move or like visually will despawn like at a different distance, things like TNT and coral dies. So, but yeah, so if you want, you can use those if you're in a creative world or something. We also have unused, which has some other things that I just don't really like seeing. The Skulk Catalyst and the Dried Kelp block. I think they just usually end up messing up how things look. So if for some reason, to preview the blocks being changed, let's use a different model. I'm just going to bring in the palette. So I'm using images as planes. And that's just something, again, that you can turn on in the add-ons. It's built in by default, so you can use that. Okay, so let's turn this into blocks, full palette, and exterior thickness. I'm going to turn auto resolution off and turn this up to 7, and I'll just scale it up. So we can actually see like a whole bunch of blocks now, and this will be helpful for letting us see what we're removing. So for instance, if you don't want any of these bee hives or the bee nests, then what you want to do is you just want to make sure that this is enabled so you can actually see things in here. And then you can just search for bee nest and beehive. We can just select them over here, press M to move. And then you want to move them to, well, you can move them to whatever collection you want, but I'm going to move them to unused right here. As long as we have unused not enabled, then they should go away. So let's do it for these ones over here also. Move that to unused, and now they're gone. So it's not being used anymore. We always have the option to turn it back on if you want, or you can move them back. You can see the kelp blocks in there too. So yeah, move them around if you don't want to use them. I don't have a way of saving those selections right now. So unfortunately, that's just a thing you'll have to do each time. Or you can maybe just save a file and just keep coming back to the same file for your objects. But yeah, you can search up here, then you can clear the selection to bring everything else back. Okay, so for the next one, I want to talk about optimizing, like making things faster. So right here, we have a city. And I'm just going to turn this into blocks. But first, I'm going to apply the scale and make sure all of these are joined together, and I'm going to delete this. Okay, let's bring this back to the start, turn this into blocks. Okay, so right now, if we try to edit any of this, it's probably going to get pretty slow. Like for instance, if we want to like change the blocks, you can see it's kind of delaying a little bit. And if we make it bigger, it's going to be even worse. So let's actually make it bigger. I'm going to save it in case it crashes. Yeah, so you can see how slow it's moving right now. And there are a few ways to optimize it that I already have it in the FAQ, but I'll tell you here also. So the first thing is just make it smaller. A thing you can do is temporarily just like make the block size bigger. So you could do that by making this like a 2, and now it's a little faster right here. Obviously you can make it bigger if you want, but I'll set this back to 1. You can also turn off auto resolution, and that will make it a lot faster. It's already moving faster. Basically, if you have auto resolution off or you have the resolution low, it's going to be faster. If you have subdivide mesh turned off or lower, it's going to be faster. Make instances real. If you have this checked, it will be faster, typically. Join all parts is very slow, so don't use that unless you have to. And I think that's kind of it. Those are all the ways to make it faster. Next, we should talk about baking. So I actually already baked this off screen, but I can show you with a different model just to make it a little easier. We have this fruit bowl right here, and it is made of multiple objects, and it is parented to an empty. So as always, select part of the mesh, press A, then we can, let's apply the scale and rotation, join selected objects, and let's delete this. Let's make this quite a bit bigger. You can see the dimensions right there. That's how many blocks wide it's going to be. So let's turn this into blocks, apply the scale. And we have quite a few materials. So if you wanted to, you actually could go through and place all of them here. I think there are only 10, but it's going to be a lot easier to just bake it most of the time. So that's what this bake button is for. So if you don't see it, like if yours doesn't say bake a texture, or if it's not there, then you need to save your file. That's another bug that I haven't been able to figure out how to fix. But yeah, make sure that you save it. Otherwise, it doesn't know where to place the texture that it makes. And also, if you don't have it installed, it will send you to the site where you can download it. Well, it'll actually send you to the FAQ right here, and it'll tell you how to install it, and the GitHub page is right here. So you can check that out. And then basically all you have to do is select your object. And if it has any modifiers or anything like that, then you want to make sure that you apply those first. Or as I said before, you can also just click convert to mesh. This one doesn't have any modifiers, so we don't have to worry about that. But most things you should be able to just select them and click bake texture. And this is going to create a texture that's like 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels. You can see already that it saved it. So the place that it saves it is going to be wherever this file that you're using, wherever that file is. So you can see up here, like the file path. And if I open it up, you can see that it named it the same name as the object over here, except it has 3 dots in front of it. The reason for the 3 dots is that when we turn this into blocks, it just makes it so it's at the very top right here. You can see we have that one. And now the colors should be correct. Let's just scale this up a little more so we can see it. And yeah, the colors are matching a little better now. One thing that happens with this is that you're not going to be able to see your materials here anymore. The reason for that is because sometimes the materials can interfere with the image that you're using right here. Because like I said, when you have multiple materials and multiple images, you want to make sure that it's in the same order that it's appearing over here. And using this, it wouldn't be the same order. So basically we just have to remove all of these materials, but it does it automatically. So yeah, this, you can tell that's a pineapple. It might not be the most accurate. And so if you want it to be more accurate, you can do it manually with the BakeLab add-on that you downloaded. This is just my attempt at doing like a one-click solution so that it's just choosing all of the settings that I think will work for most people. So it might not work for every model. You might have to unwrap it and do some stuff like that. Or you can just use these settings over here to change things. Basically, all you want to do is bake to a diffuse map. That's just going to look at the color of the object. Is going to ignore the roughness and things like that. But if you want, you can mess with these settings to get something a little more specific. You can change the resolution, things like that. So now we can talk about exporting. So if you don't have the exporter installed already, then this will send you to the page where you can get it. And I didn't make the exporter. So you can see right here, it says it's made by Brian. And you can click that to go to the Gumroad page to download it. So I didn't make it. I am in contact with Brian to help him like make sure that it works with BlockBlender properly, but I don't decide what price it is. I don't really know how it works that well. So definitely ask him questions about that. Or like, if you're mad that it costs a lot, don't tell me about it because like I can't change that. You can talk to him about it. He made it. I didn't make it. I get a lot of questions about it and like I didn't make it. So yeah, you can get it here. And then once you install it, then we'll have this export schematic button. Basically, you just need to select your object and then click this button and it will give you some options on the side also if you want to like rotate it or scale it up, things like that. And then you can just decide where you want to save it. It's going to save as a .schem file like that. And then you can use a program like Litematica. I'm not going to show you how to do it just because like the way that I learned how to do it is I just searched how to use Litematica, how to install Litematica, things like that. I just searched for it and I'm not like an expert at using that program, that plugin. So you can just look it up. Basically, you just put it in a folder that it tells you to use, and then you can bring things into Minecraft. I've shown it a little in other videos, so you can check those out if you want. But yeah, that will help you actually bring it directly into Minecraft. It will work with Bedrock. I think there's like a website called Amulet, or maybe it's an add-on. I don't know. I've seen Brian talk about it, explaining to other people. Again, I don't really know how it works that well, so that's a question for Brian. You can go to his page. He has information about like the best practices and how to contact him and things like that. So if you have problems with the exporter, ask Brian. Next, we also have gradient tools, which is kind of a separate thing. It's basically just going to import these. And this is just for reference for like if you're building in Minecraft, you can kind of get an idea of like what blocks would flow into each other a little better. And you can just change it over here in the modifier settings, and it should update in real time for you. You can just change the color. So this one's just linear. It's just 2 colors. This one's also 2 colors, but it's radial. And then this one is 4 colors. So it's 1 at each corner like that. You can do whatever you want. All right, let's take a quick look at the FAQ to see if I missed anything. So how to use BlockBlender. It's just going to send you to a YouTube playlist, which is going to contain this video. And those are the best ways to learn because I have the most stuff. You do need to use Blender. A lot of people think that I like made Blender or that BlockBlender is its own program for some reason. That's not true. It's just an add-on that I made. So you have to use Blender. You have to use 3.5 or 3.6 for this version that I'm talking about. If you want to update to a new version of BlockBlender, You just go back to your Gumroad library or Blender Market library. You can see I have links right here. You will have to be signed in for these links to work. It will just send you to where you can download it again. You don't have to pay. Download the new file. That's it. I talked about if it uses an image texture or multiple textures, you can either bake it or you can use multiple images. Blocks don't appear. Sometimes if you have the wrong Blender version, like if it's too old, then it just won't work. And if you like save with an old version and try to bring it into a new version, it can kind of break the file. So that's a thing that happens. Or it would have a hole in it, which I already showed how to fix that with exterior thickness, or it might be too small, in which case you just make it bigger. Also, be careful about like it being parented to things, which again, I already showed. You can just apply the scale of everything. If parts of the models aren't appearing, same reason, it's probably just too thin or has holes. Joining, you just press the join button. Blocks aren't right side up. You apply the rotation with the apply scale and rotation button. Oh, this is an interesting one. If you want to move blocks without moving the model, if you want it to be like one block in the center instead of two, there's an interesting way to do that. Yeah, let's go with the beach ball and I'll just scale this down a little more. Okay, so a way to do this quickly is to press this tool button right here. You can also, I think I already said, you can press N to open and close this, or you can pull open this button. But you just want to select Affect Origins right here. And then this will let you like rotate. It's rotating all of the blocks, but as you can see, the colors are kind of staying in the same spot. You can also scale this up and down. And this is going to be changing the scale, but it's going to try to keep the dimensions the same. You can also move this around. So if you do this, you can see that the blocks are kind of shifting position. And if you wanted to, you could use this to try to make it in the center like that. So there's one block in the center. So that's how you would do that, is just affecting the origins. Just make sure that when you're done, you uncheck that so that you're not constantly using it. Blender lagging or crashing, that's probably just you have like you're using too many blocks. Like I've already shown that if you make this really big, you see at a certain point, like it's already starting to lag like that. If you make it big enough, it's just going to crash. So sometimes people will have issues where they're just trying to convert a model that's already like really huge. So just make it smaller first, or you can optimize some settings. Or sometimes if you want, you can also just break things into multiple pieces. So if you want to break things into multiple pieces, actually, let's go back to the city because I think I messed this up. This is a good example to show a thing that can happen. So it seems like this became unlinked, and a way to fix that, it's kind of annoying, but you can just open up a new window right here, go to the image editor, and you can just open the image. So let's see, it would be this one, building material. We can open that image and it's this one right here, or maybe it's this one. Yeah. Okay. So now it works. Basically, you just have to bring the image back in. Sometimes that'll just happen. Anyway, if you want to separate parts of your model, you can just tab into edit mode, probably make sure you're in X-ray mode right here, and you can select parts like that. And then press P and separate by selection. And this will make it a separate object. So now we have two objects like this. And you can convert this one into blocks and then export that as its own schematic. And you can do the same thing for like other tiles. And then you can piece them together. It's a little more annoying, I guess, to do it that way. But if it's a really huge map, like I've seen people try to do this with like really big game maps, and it's just not really, Blender just can't handle it. It's going to be too many blocks, especially if you want it real scale. So yeah, this is probably the best way to go about it, is to export it in chunks. And then when you're done, you can remove the modifier and like maybe hide it right here or delete it, something like that. So yeah, that's one thing you can do. This one is just how to turn each block into separate objects. If you do that, you're not going to be able to export it still, but it's pretty easy. All you have to do is select your thing, your object, make sure that make instance is real is checked. Then you can convert it to a mesh, come into here to edit mode, select everything, P, and then separate by loose parts, and then back into object mode. And now each of these blocks is its own piece right here. You can see that if I try to rotate it, it's not rotating from the middle. So if you want them to all be rotated from the middle, you can select everything, right click, set origin to center of mass. I would choose volume like that. And it's just going to make it so they all have their own origin point in the center like that. I think that is probably it. The rest is about texture baking and about the exporter. So yeah, hopefully this cleared things up for a lot of people. I hope this actually helps. If there's another big update, then I will make a new video. Until then, have a good one.